Yvette Cooper, thanks for coming on the show today. Net migration figures have come out today. They would have shocked people. I want to come to Labour's solutions, such as they are, in a bit. But first, I want to ask you about fundamental points about your attitude to immigration and how it's evolved. You supported Remain in the referendum. For clarity, you were in favour of unlimited EU migration into the UK under freedom of movement. That was your position in the past.
So, as you know, Labour did, way back at the referendum, support Remain, but Brexit is in place now, and we are clear we need to make Brexit work. On immigration, our policy is to have a points-based system and to reform that points-based system, not to go back to free movement. Actually, we need to focus on the points-based system and how we make it work for the UK. It's not working at the moment, particularly because it is not linked to skills shortages in the economy and some of the long-term problems in our country.
And I want to get on to Labour's policy. But the reason I asked you about that to start off with is that Labour leader Keir Starmer, 4 years after the Brexit vote, stood before Labour Party members and said, under the heading "My pledges to you," this on migration, he said, defend migrants' rights, full voting rights for EU nationals, defend free movement as we leave the EU. How much of that set of policies are still operational?
So we've left the EU, and Keir has said very many times our policy is a points-based system. We're not returning to free movement.
So
there are changes. We're not returning to free movement, definitely not. There are changes we want to make to the points-based system, particularly linked to skills.
Yeah.
But we're very clear. It's a points-based system is the right approach.
And does he want to see EU nationals voting in UK general elections?
That's not policy. I know there are debates about all sorts of these issues, but it's not policy.
He said it back in 2020. He said it, full voting rights for EU nationals.
And he's also said, since this is not our policy.
OK, so that isn't Labour policy anymore?
That's right.
It seems that the Labour Party have undergone a collective conversion about this, from freedom of movement to now a points-based system. It has evolved, clearly, and I want to come to those solutions you talk about. But just to start off, is 606,000 net migration figure, is it too high?
I think that net migration should come down from these unusually high levels. I think that we would expect it to come down because, obviously, it includes the Ukraine and Hong Kong figures, which I think everybody would agree. We support the action to help people from Ukraine and Hong Kong. But the other concern for us in these figures is there's been a doubling of the number of work visas in just a few years. They've gone up by 120%, and we still have skills shortages across the country. So that, I think, is the real failing, and that's why our policies would actually address some of these skills shortages,
I'm going to come
so
on
that
to
you
that.
don't have this continual switch towards overseas recruitment rather than training and investing.
Is economic migration good or bad for the UK economy?
We're always going to need international recruitment, and let's be clear that our country has benefited for generations from people who've come here to build our biggest businesses, to work in our public services and be part of our country. That's who we are. But the system also needs to be properly controlled and managed so that it's fair. And there is this problem at the heart of it, which is these growing skills shortages that are never being addressed. And that's why we want those skills shortages addressed. Of course, in something like health and social care, we're going to continue to need a health and social care visa. But it's a serious problem that we're just not training enough nurses and doctors here in the UK.
Your big sort of policy is around skill shortages. You're not going to give an overall target for net migration figures, but will you promise the British people that there will be fewer work visas granted by Labour than the current government? There were 300,000 in the year to March 2023. So can I take it that, given this is the centrepiece of your policy, you will at least pledge that to the British people, that you will bring the number of work visas down over a Labour government?
Well, we're not setting targets, but what we are doing is setting practical policies. And I think that's the right way to do it because, to be honest, I think for too long, people have seen, ever since 2010, people have seen politicians sit there and set targets and make all of these promises, and they've all actually been meaningless. So what we're instead doing is setting out what the policies would be. And the policies would be to say, when you've got occupations on the shortage occupation list, which accounts for around half of all skilled worker visas, those jobs should be linked to proper training plans in the UK. Engineers have been on the shortage list for about 15 years. No proper plan to make sure you get the training in the UK. So you've got 50,000 shortfall every year, according to some estimates. So you link it, first of all, with the training plans. Particularly, that means around the NHS, where we would have a substantial increase, which would mean the NHS wouldn't need the same scale of recruitment from overseas. And then also, I don't know if you want to come on to this, getting rid of this pay discount in the immigration system, which is also really unfair and is an incentive for employers to recruit from overseas rather than to recruit and train in the UK.
You've made it clear that you want to tackle skill shortages with domestic workers. But what I'm hearing too is that Labour are having a go at the government about net migration figures, and at the same time, you won't set your own targets about where you want the level to go to. Neither will you commit to bringing down the level of work visas now. So I think that's having your cake and eat it. You have a go at them, but you won't set your own targets. That is what is clear to me.
Well, what we're criticising them for is having no plan and having no grip. And that ultimately is the difference, both on immigration and on asylum. We're setting out very practical plans.
But how can the public judge you if you say, we will have this plan, but you won't give them anything to measure you about, which is, for example, not unreasonable if you're going to train all these domestic workers to say, by the end of the next Labour Parliament, next Labour government over 5 years, we will bring work visas down from the current levels. That seems to me a very modest ambition if you deliver on these pledges.
I think the more important thing, to be honest, is to set out the practical plan. And I can go through another part of our plan, which would be a substantial reform. We would get rid of the current 20% discount in the immigration system, which means that employers, where they've got a shortage occupation, which is a lot of occupations, they can recruit people at 20% less than the going rate. The going rate's already lower than the average rate, so that is a really big discount on average pay that allows employers to recruit at that level from overseas. Now, that is an incentive for those employers to recruit from overseas rather than to train at home, rather than to pay fairly at home. And to be honest, I just think everybody should be paid the going rate.
Keir Starmer has talked about when he sees a vision for Britain, he hasn't talked about a 5-year plan, he has talked about a decade plan. Sure. He has talked, if you like, in blue thinking terms or blue sky thinking about a 10-year programme for government. I mean, Annalise Dodds, your predecessor and Labour's chair, has been honest about it. She told Sky News potentially in some areas where there's a short-term need for skills, you could see in the short term actually people who are coming in increasing in numbers. That's true, isn't it? It could actually go up before it comes down. Fair?
I think that the net migration figures, I believe the net migration figures should come down, and also, actually, I would expect them to come down because you've got Ukraine figures and the other figures around Hong Kong as well. But we also think on the issues around the work visas, we really should be investing in the UK, and we really should be investing in training as well. Don't get me wrong, there will always be important international recruitment, and that will continue to be the case. We're going to need talent and skills, you know, the best talent and skills from all over the world.
Am I right in thinking that you did not like the Starmer attack ads claiming the Prime Minister does not believe adults convicted of sexually assaulting children are going to go to prison? You didn't like that, did you?
I'm not going to apologise for hard-hitting ads that recognise that the Prime Minister has been in charge and is part of a Conservative government that has been in charge for 13 years. There have been a whole series of failures around the criminal justice system, and one of the biggest failures has been the huge drop in the charge rate. That's across all kinds of crimes. You know, we've dropped from around about 2/3 in terms of the charge rate. That does bluntly mean more criminals are getting off and more victims are being let down.
The reason I asked partly, Yvette, if you don't mind, is that the fallout of that row was talk that you'd slightly fallen out with Starmer, that you might not continue as Shadow Home Secretary. Is that all rubbish? Do you expect to have this? Do you expect to have this job going into the general election?
Total rubbish, and that Keir and I work really closely together, including on all of these issues all of the time. But, you know, you and I, Beth, have been around for quite a long time, and we... sadly, we never take too seriously the sort of, nonsense, gossip and stuff that, will always appear in the papers. And let's be clear, in the run-up to a general election, we know there will be all kinds of stuff appearing in the papers that's total nonsense and that'll be attacking us.
So you will
but
have
we're
this
really
job going
clear
into the general
about
election.
the important thing is that we're working together as a team and actually setting out policies that we have worked on together as a team, that Keir and I have worked on, that I've been working with Rachel, with Bridget and so on.
So let's kill this off now. To be clear, you will be the Shadow Home Secretary going into the general election.
Well, look, I'm keeping working on this. It's for Keir set out the team that he wants, and that's for him.
Just final question, because the Sky News investigation has revealed abuses of the skilled worker visa scheme, which allowed migrants to come here to work and bring dependents. Sky uncovered the abuse of the scheme by people traffickers who charge huge amounts of money to get visas, then send them fake dependents to accompany the workers, who then disappear into the UK on arrival. How worried are you about those sorts of allegations?
So I think it is really serious the way some of the criminal gangs operate, particularly the trafficking gangs. There are also people smuggler operations and so on. And we think much stronger action is needed to go after the criminal gangs. It's partly why we've said we need a new cross-border unit, policing unit, to go after the criminal gangs. But that's to go after them in the UK and across Europe as well, and to work with other forces to do so. I am very worried that some of the government's legislation is actually watering down the action against these trafficking gangs. We think that enforcement needs to be much stronger rather than weaker.
OK, Yvette Cooper, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.